We're going to take a dive now into a little bit of a conundrum, the drivers that are required at boot time. When our kernel loads during the boot process, the kernel needs to mount our file systems. The file systems are going to contain our kernel modules. These are the drivers. But here lies our problem. The drivers needed to access the hardware and file systems are located, well, you've guessed it, on the file system, often in the USR lib directory or USR lib64. So during the installation, to resolve this issue, there is something called the initialization RAM disk, or init.rd. This file is created and it supports the boot process and accessing the root file system, which is going to include things like modules to access the disk controllers, as well as the disks and file systems. So why don't we take a little bit of time to investigate this by looking at our initialization RAM disk file on our Ubuntu system. And welcome back. Look at this, our command line, a command line waiting for us to start learning. So why don't we begin by moving into the /boot directory. This, as the name suggests, where the boot files are going to be located. Using ls, I can list the files that we have here. We've got really our kernel configuration, and our important initialization RAM disk. But we have different versions as we've been through at least one update. But the nice thing is understanding these light blue or cyan files. Using ls-l, we can kind of gain the understanding of what they're here for. We can see they point to other files. So they are shortcuts. So for the current initialization RAM disk, I can access it through the file name init.rd.img. And for the latest kernel, I can go through and access it through the file vmlinux. So let's clear the screen with Control and L, and we'll run one of our magnificent ls commands, and we're going to look at ls init ramfs, our RAM file system, our initialization disk. So if we go through now and take a look and point it to the symbolic link, init.rd.img, it will follow that link pointing to the latest RAM disk that we have, and we can see then that we're starting to list the contents of this file. One of the main features of this is it's going to support drivers to access our all-important root file system. We don't want every kernel driver built in there, but we need then to be able to access our USR lib directory. So as we scroll through, we can see that we have various files to support the boot process, and that's really Plymouth, a splash screen. We have fonts to support that. Moving up, we have a few programs to actually run checks on our file systems. And as we scroll our way a little bit further up, we're going to be starting to look in our USR and lib64 directory structures, where we're going to start finding our modules. Some of the modules will be standard modules, so .so files, but we should be able to scroll through to be able to find where our kernel modules are, where we have a .ko within our path. These are our modules or our drivers. But hopefully this answers that chicken and egg question, the conundrum of how do I access my root file system when my drivers to access my root file system are on my root file system.